The lasagna dish slipped from my hands when I read the note on the kitchen counter, and I didn't even try to catch it. It shattered on the tile, red sauce spreading across the floor, like something that couldn't be taken back. I stood there in my coat, still holding my car keys, reading the same 11 words over and over until they stopped making sense. "You'll look after Uncle Gene. He needs you." That was it. No explanation, no apology, not even my name. My husband of 6 years had left me a Post-it note. I became aware of a sound behind me, slow, deliberate, the creak of the old recliner in the living room. I turned to find a man I'd met exactly twice at family gatherings watching me from across the room. A plaid blanket across his laps, eyes far too sharp for someone who'd been described to me as pretty far gone. "He take the good car?" the old man asked. "Both," I said, because I'd noticed on the way in that the driveway held only my Civic. He nodded like I'd confirmed something he already knew. "Classic. My name is Avery. I'm 38 years old, and I drove 4 hours from Columbus to spend Christmas with my husband's family in rural Indiana, a cooler full of food in my back seat, a wrapped box of bourbon truffles for my mother-in-law, and a heart full of something that I now understood had been foolishness. My husband's name is Caleb. His mother is Donna, and the man watching me from the recliner, the man Caleb had apparently volunteered me to babysit while he flew to Arizona with his former college girlfriend, was his great-uncle, Gene Harwick, 79 years old, retired civil engineer, widower. "There's a broom closet off the kitchen," Gene said, nodding toward the mess on the floor. "Second door on the left. Not that I'd be much help with the sweeping." I cleaned up the lasagna in a kind of trance. The pieces of the ceramic dish went in the trash can under the sink. The sauce came up with paper towels and then a mop I found propped in the closet corner. I worked mechanically, the way you do when your mind is somewhere else entirely, somewhere trying to calculate how long this had been planned and how many of the last several months had been performance. Caleb had mentioned Tara exactly once, back in October, old friend from IU. "She's going through a rough patch." He'd said it the way you mentioned the weather. Like it required no follow-up. My phone showed 3 unanswered calls to his cell and a voicemail inbox that picked up on the first ring. "He won't answer," Gene said from the doorway. He was leaning on a 4-pronged cane, more mobile than I'd been led to believe. "He didn't answer me either when I called to ask if someone was coming for Christmas," called Donna instead. "She said she needed a break." "A break? From what?" I asked before I could stop myself. Gene smiled, but there was no warmth in it. For me, I imagine. I looked around the kitchen properly, for the first time. A ring of dried coffee on the counter, a sing-sol plate in the drying rack. The refrigerator, when I opened it out of some automatic instinct towards usefulness, held half a block of cheddar, a can of ginger ale, and what appeared to be a very old rotisserie chicken. "When did they leave?" I asked. "Tuesday." Today was Friday, Christmas Eve. "Have you eaten?" "Saltines," he said. "And some of that cheese." I stood in the middle of someone else's kitchen holding a set of keys to a car I'd driven 4 hours in the dark and thought, I can leave. I can get back in the Civic and drive home and deal with all of this from a safe distance. I had friends in Columbus. I had my own apartment that I'd kept even after the wedding, subletting it to a grad student, because some part of me had apparently never fully let go of the exit. Instead, I opened the cooler I'd hauled in from the back seat and started taking out groceries. "You brought food," Gene observed. "I brought food for a family Christmas," I said. "So I guess it's just us." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know where Donna keeps the good pot." We made dinner together, or rather, I cooked and Gene sat at the kitchen table and directed me toward things I couldn't find: the cast iron skillet, the good colander, the drawer that stuck. He knew this kitchen the way you know a place you've spent real time in. He and his late wife, Millie, had visited every summer for 20 years, he said. Before things changed. "What changed?" I asked. "Donna remarried," he said. "After Gene Sr. passed, God rest him. New husband had opinions about family." He paused. "Then Caleb grew up and developed opinions of his own." I set a plate in front of him, chicken thighs I'd brought in the cooler, roasted with the potatoes and carrots meant for tomorrow's Christmas dinner, a green salad, a roll from the bag I'd grabbed at a gas station off I-70. Jean looked at the plate for a long moment without speaking. "When's the last time someone cooked for you?" I asked. "Millie died 4 years ago," he said. "So we ate." Outside, snow had started falling in the way Indiana snow does, quietly and with a kind of grim commitment. Jean asked me how I'd met Caleb, and I told him the real version. The version I didn't usually tell, where I'd been the one more in love, the one who'd adjusted her life around his convenience. So gradually I hadn't noticed until the adjustments were the whole structure. I'd given up a job offer in Seattle because Caleb said long distance would be too hard. I'd stopped taking freelance photography contracts on weekends because they made him feel neglected. I'd moved out of the apartment I loved into a house that was technically in both our names, but felt like where his things were displayed, and my boxes were still in the basement. "And you're just now seeing it," Jean said. It wasn't a question. I kept explaining it away. He nodded. "That's what they count on." After dinner, Jean asked if I'd help him to his study. It was a small room at the end of the hall, clearly his, shelves of engineering textbooks, a drafting table that served as a desk, a framed photo of a woman I recognized as Millie from the Christmas cards I'd seen in old albums. The rest of the house felt like Donna's. This room felt like a person. He lowered himself into the desk chair with effort, opened the bottom drawer, and took out a folder. "I want to show you something," he said. "You can say no. You can say it's none of your business and drive home tonight, and I won't hold it against you. But I've been waiting for someone trustworthy to walk through that door for about 8 months." I sat down on the footstool near the bookcase. "Show me." The folder contained bank statements, medical records, and a legal pad covered in Jean's handwriting, dates, dollar amounts, names. He had COPD, stage 3. Diagnosed the previous February. He'd been managing it, mostly, but the medications required careful timing, and the oxygen concentrator in his bedroom needed someone to set it up properly when his levels dropped, which they did with increasing frequency. Donna had power of attorney. She had set herself up as his primary contact with the insurance company and the pharmacy. Over the past 8 months, according to Jean's meticulous notes, she had delayed 3 prescription refills, redirected $23 from his account into an account in her name, and twice canceled appointments with his pulmonologist, once citing scheduling conflicts, and once simply not telling him until after the date had passed. "Did Caleb know?" I asked. "Caleb helped her set up the bank transfer," Jean said. "I was in the room. They thought I was asleep." I stared at the legal pad. "I need someone to help me finish what I started," Jean said. "I have an attorney, but she's in Indianapolis and I haven't been able to get to her. I have documents that need witnessing. I have a real will that is very different from the one Donna thinks exists." He looked at me steadily. "And I have maybe 6 months, maybe less." The snow outside the window was coming harder now. "Tell me what you need," I said. What followed was 3 days I will spend the rest of my life turning over in my mind, not for the legal maneuvering, which was real and necessary, but for who Jean Harwick turned out to be when someone was finally paying attention. He was funny, in a dry, precise way that caught you off guard. He had opinions about architecture that he delivered like verdicts. He had loved Millie since he was 22 years old and still referred to her, 4 years after her death, in the present tense. "Millie hates overhead lighting. We always use lamps." Before catching himself with a small private expression, I pretended not to notice. On Christmas morning, I found him already awake in the kitchen when I came downstairs at 7, sitting in the gray light with a cup of coffee he'd made himself, which I'd told him not to do alone because of the oxygen risk. "You were going to tell me not to do that," he said without turning around. I was noted. He pushed a second mug across the counter. "Merry Christmas." I called his attorney that morning, a woman named Patricia who had represented Jean for over 20 years and who had, she told me with barely concealed relief, been waiting for someone to facilitate exactly this. She drove up from Indianapolis on December 26th with a notary and a paralegal and spent 4 hours at the kitchen table going through documents, while Jean signed things with hands that shook slightly but with a mind that was, as Patricia kept confirming for the record, entirely clear. The real will bore very little resemblance to the one Donna had presumably been planning around. The house in Indiana, which Donna believed she would inherit outright, was already owned by a family trust Jean had established years ago. His investment accounts, which Caleb had been trying to get a clearer picture of for months, were structured in a way that made unauthorized access essentially impossible. "She's going to contest this," Patricia said, not unhappily. "Let her," Jean said. While Patricia organized documents, I did something that felt small but mattered. I went to 3 different stores on December 26th, when everything was picked over and half closed, to find a specific thing Jean had mentioned in passing. His had made him a sweet potato pie every Christmas. Not the canned filling kind. He described it in enough detail. The texture, the particular balance of spice, the way Millie crimped the crust, that I understood it was not a small thing. I found the recipe found a kitchen store open for their after-Christmas sale, bought a proper pie dish, and made it. It took 2 attempts. The second one was right. When I set it in front of him that evening, Jean looked at it for a long moment. "That's the right color," he said finally. I watched 3 videos. He took a bite and was quiet in a way that told me everything. "She would have liked you," he said. That night, after Jean had gone to sleep, I finally looked at my phone properly. There were 14 texts from Caleb. Starting with breezy check-ins, moving through mild curiosity about why I wasn't responding, arriving eventually at a tone that I recognized as the one he used when he was about to reframe a situation as my fault. The last message said, "Uncle Jean is a lot to handle. Just want to make sure you're managing okay." There was also a string of Instagram posts from Donna's account. "Sedona in December is genuinely beautiful. The red rocks photograph well at sunset." There were several photos of Donna and Caleb and a blonde woman I recognized as Tara, who appeared to be having a wonderful time. I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter. 2 days after Christmas, Jean had a difficult night. I heard the oxygen concentrator alarm at 2 in the morning and was down the hall before I was fully awake. He was sitting up in bed, breathing in the careful way that people do when they're trying not to alarm anyone, his levels lower than they should have been. I adjusted the equipment, sat with him until things stabilized, and then, at his insistence, stayed in the armchair in the corner rather than going back upstairs. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," I said. We talked until almost 4 in the morning, about Millie, about a bridge Jean had designed in 1987 that was still standing in western Kentucky, about the particular loneliness of being old in a family that has decided you are a problem to be managed. He told me about the first time he'd understood what Donna and Caleb were actually doing. Not neglect through carelessness, but deliberate, strategic neglect aimed at the specific goal of ensuring he declined before he could get his legal affairs properly sorted. "They thought they had time," he said. "People who are planning to inherit always think they have time." The next morning, a neighbor named Rosemary appeared at the door with a casserole and what turned out to be 2 years of quietly observed evidence. "She's had Jean's spare key. He'd given it to her 18 months ago," she said, because she was the one who actually came when he fell in the backyard in October. Not Caleb, who'd been 20 minutes away watching football. Rosemary. She stayed for 2 hours and told me things in the careful, factual way of someone who has been waiting for the right person to tell. Prescription bags left on the porch in the rain, a home health aide who'd been hired and then quietly let go when Donna decided the expense was excessive. A Christmas 2 years ago when no one came at all, and Rosemary had brought Jean a plate through the snow. I documented everything she told me, with her permission, in writing she signed and dated. Jean's attorney used the word actionable when I emailed her the notes. On December 29th, we drove to Jean's bank. He insisted on going himself, and he was steady enough that day that I only hovered slightly. The branch manager greeted Jean by name with the particular warmth people reserve for customers who have held accounts for 40 years. While Jean completed the account restructuring that removed Donna from any access to his finances, the branch manager mentioned, without being asked, that Caleb had been in twice in November asking questions about Jean's accounts. He had been reminded both times that he had no authorization to receive that information. "He's persistent," the branch manager said in the tone people use when they're being generous. "He is," Jean agreed. In the car on the way back, Jean was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I want to write a letter." "To Caleb?" "To all of them," he said. "I want it read when they get back." I helped him draft it over 2 evenings. What emerged was not what I expected. Not anger, not bitterness, not a list of grievances. It was something quieter and more devastating. A precise, clear-eyed account of what it feels like to be loved conditionally. To understand in your last years that the people you housed and fed and funded and showed up for had calculated your worth in terms of what you'd leave behind. He described a Thanksgiving 8 years ago when he and Millie had hosted 17 people, and Caleb had pulled Jean aside before dessert to ask whether he'd looked into estate planning. Jean had been 69 years old and in perfect health. He wrote, "I don't say this to shame you. I say it because I want you to understand what I understood, that there is a kind of grief that has nothing to do with death. It's the grief of seeing clearly, of realizing that the people you loved saw you only as an account to be inherited. I hope you never know what that feels like from the inside. I fear you are already teaching it to yourselves." Patricia read it when I sent it to her and called me from her car. "That's going to hold up," she said, "in every sense." Jean recorded a video statement on December 30th, in the living room, in his chair, with the afternoon light coming through the window in a way he said Millie would have liked. He spoke for 22 minutes directly to the camera, calm, methodical, completely lucid, devastatingly specific. He described what had happened to his medications. He described the account transfers. He described what it had meant, at 79 with failing lungs, to spend Christmas Eve alone in a cold house with a wheel of cheddar and a sleeve of saltines. "Avery showed me more consideration in 1 week," he said, looking at the camera, "than my family showed me in the last 4 years. That matters to me. I want it on record." We watched it back together afterward, and I had to excuse myself for a few minutes. On New Year's Eve, Jean asked for a specific thing. He wanted to hear the Coltrane record he and Millie had played at their wedding reception. It took me most of an afternoon to find it in the study, deep in a cabinet behind a row of old engineering journals. The record player still worked. We sat in the living room with the snow falling outside. Quieter now, just a steady sift, and listened to the whole side without talking. 51 years, he said when it ended. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was impatient and opinionated, and she was the only person who ever really saw me, he said. That's about as good as it gets. On January 2nd, I heard a car in the driveway. I had known they were coming. Caleb had finally started calling 2 days before, first cheerful, then confused by my tone, then a long and careful conversation in which he said several things that were technically apologetic without ever actually containing an apology. He said he'd needed space. He said things with Tara were complicated. He said he hoped I understood. I understood very clearly. I wore a gray dress I'd brought for Christmas dinner, and I stood in the living room near Jean's empty rocking chair, and I waited. Caleb came in first, tan in the way people get in Arizona in December, and his mother behind him, and Tara. Yes, Tara came too, which told me something I had already suspected about how this was all going to resolve. "Hey," Caleb said, his eyes moving from me to the empty chair to the closed expression on my face. "Where's?" "Jean passed away on New Year's Eve," I said. The shopping bags Caleb was holding hit the floor. Donna made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a calculation. "What do you mean he? When did?" "At home," I said. Peacefully. His doctor had estimated he had 6 months. As it turned out, he had a little under 2 weeks. I let them have a moment with that. Tara had stepped backward toward the front door. "You should have called us," Caleb said. "I called your phone 14 times starting on Christmas Eve. I can show you the log." His mouth opened and closed. "There are some things Jean wanted you to hear," I said, and led them to the living room, where the television was already connected to the tablet. I pressed play without preamble. Jean's voice filled the room. Donna sat down slowly on the couch like something structural had failed in her legs. Caleb stood with his arms crossed, jaw tightening, the expression I had seen many times over 6 years, the one that meant he was constructing a counter-narrative. Teresa sat in the armchair near the window and had the dignity to look genuinely uncomfortable. When it ended, no one spoke for almost a minute. Then Caleb said, "This is insane. She manipulated him. She was alone with a sick old man for 10 days, I said, and I have a notarized record of every one of them." Patricia arrived at 1 o'clock in a coat that cost more than my first car, her briefcase under her arm, and a notary named Franklin at her side. She was the kind of person who makes a room feel like a courtroom just by walking into it. She read the will. She was precise and unhurried and used the language of a woman who had spent 40 years making things very difficult to argue with: the trust, the accounts, the house. Jean's estate would be managed by a trustee, me, with specific provisions for distribution to elder care organizations Jean had named, and a portion designated for me directly, a number that made the room very quiet when Patricia read it aloud. Donna had gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with grief. "He was confused," she said. "He was on medication. He was examined by 2 physicians," Patricia said, "both of whom certified his competence at the time of signing. He provided 22 minutes of video testimony. He had the signatures of a notary, 2 witnesses, and his attorney of 23 years. She looked at Donna over her glasses. "You are welcome to challenge it. I've handled challenges. I'm very good at it." The thing about Caleb, which I had known for years without letting myself know it, was that he never fully committed to anything that was losing. He could see the shape of this. I watched him recalculate. "Avery," he said, and his voice had shifted. Lower now, almost gentle, the voice he used when he wanted something. "We can fix this. I made mistakes." "I know I did. We can start over. We can—" "You left your dying great-uncle alone on Christmas Eve," I said, with a post-it note and a wheel of cheddar. His face did something complicated. I took off my wedding ring. I held it out. He didn't take it right away, so I set it on the end table next to his father's photograph and picked up my bag. "Tara probably needs a ride back to Phoenix," I said. "I'd figure that out sooner rather than later." I walked to the front door. Donna said something. I heard my name, and then I heard the word fraud, and then Caleb's voice over hers, already pivoting toward damage control. The sound blurred behind me like something heard through glass. Rosemary was standing on her porch across the street when I came out, which made me think she'd been watching the driveway. She raised one hand. I raised mine back. The drive back to Columbus took 4.5 hours in the January dark. I thought about Jean the whole way, not the legal architecture of what we'd built together, and not the money, and not what came next. I thought about him sitting in the early morning kitchen with his coffee, about the way he talked about Millie in the present tense, about his face when he tasted the sweet potato pie, about what he'd said in the last conversation we had that felt like a conversation rather than a vigil. You know what she taught me? That being seen by one person, really seen, is enough. It's more than enough. Most people never get even that. I had spent 6 years making myself smaller so someone could feel bigger. I had driven 4 hours in the dark to save a holiday that had already been discarded. I had stood in a kitchen with broken ceramic at my feet and chosen, for some reason I couldn't fully articulate then and understand better now, to stay. What I found, in that 10 days in a cold house in Indiana, was not what I went looking for. I went looking for Christmas. I found something closer to clarity, the kind that only comes when everything else has been stripped away. Jean was right. Being seen is more than enough. I'm starting to learn what that means for myself.